everyone, and thank you so much for joining me today for our virtual event on the topic of brain-based productivity hacks. My name is Linda Stacy, and today's presentation is the fifth installment in a series of live virtual sessions for the 2018 IEEE Women in Engineering International Leadership Conference. The virtual track is brought to you by our sponsor, Ericsson, and the entire series of events will be taking place on Wednesdays from now until May. So we've branded the series hashtag We Wednesday. So I'm going to spell it out. It's hashtag WIEWEDNESDAY. In order to participate in today's session or ask a question, please join the conversation on Twitter or YouTube live chat. Just send your question using the hashtag We Wednesday or follow us on Twitter at WIEILC. And we'll get to as many questions as we can at the end of the session. And also, if there are any things that are said in the midst of the session that you would like me to repeat or to just clarify or to go a little bit deeper, please send those questions too. It can be very frustrating to have someone fly by some content that you really wanted to hear and you didn't quite get it. So enter those as well. So again, my name is Linda Stacy and my company is LivingBluPrints. And this is a boutique training and consulting firm. Productivity mostly is what I do. I'm based in Boston, the greater Boston area, and I'm curious to know where everyone else is today. So can you go to the live chat and tell me where you are? And as I begin to see some of those places come in, I will read them out. So I'm very anxious to see where everyone is today. My background is in management consulting, in fact, and throughout my career, I have done training, and I've been very, very interested in how we learn as humans and the variation in how we learn and who we are and how we approach our work as well. So in 2012, I began to study everything I could about productivity and this approach to the workplace. All right, New Jersey and Ontario are coming in. Thank you. So over time, I developed a proprietary model that I bring into organizations, into teams and individuals. I'm going to hold this up. This is the model. I just want to show you really quickly. Back up a little bit. This model we'll be looking at actually at the conference where I'll be speaking, doing one of the breakout sessions. And today we're only going to be talking about an aspect of execute, which is right here when we talk about our productivity hacks. But this is the model. Ooh, excuse me. There it goes. And like, as I said, we're going to just be covering the execution portion of it today. So I want to thank again our sponsor, Ericsson. And going back to what the goal is behind productivity and workflow management, the idea behind LivingBluPrints in my company is that everyone in an organization, from individual contributor to top executive, should and can have a productive, effective, and successful experience of their work life. We all have various needs to achieve things. The company has its organizational goals, and as individual, we have our goals and need for achievement as well. And many, many things can get in the way of achievement. We have a few other places here: Colorado, Boulder, Worcester, Mass, New York. Awesome. So the things that get in the way of achievement can include, just lack of a plan or an approach to conquering complex tasks or tasks that we resist because we feel that we're not good at them. We could also have some organizational, cultural issues that get behind achievement not happening. This can be linked to a belief system that may or may not be an accurate reflection of what's happening. But no matter what the issues are that get in the way of achievement, almost all of them can be traced back to the fact that we're human beings, we're biological beings, and that our brain is very dynamic. So we're going to talk about some of those things today. And I want to back up for just a second and to say that we all have different things that we're good at. And depending on where you've been so far in your career, you've probably been tested at some point, some kind of assessment has been given. There's the concept of multiple intelligences. So it's not whether or not you're smart, it's what are you smart at, if you could say it like that. You may have had a Strengths Finder type of assessment. And with the Strengths Finder, there are 34 different aspects that you're being ranked on, essentially. And once you do the Strengths Finder, 5 are identified for you. And those are your top strengths. And according to the Strengths Finder, you should really work towards those, do more of those and do less of the things that you're not good at. And just a side note that of the 34 total strengths, only about 4 of them are really behind this organization, this natural ability to organize one's work, one's space. And a lot of times organization can get in the way of productivity. So we're not all good at everything. Some of us are born more organized than others. There's a lot of variability in this. What is true, though, is that we all have things that we are personally good at. There's another assessment. This assessment tests your cognitive strengths, and not as many people know about this one. And the cognitive strength is your approach to creative problem solving. And I can use a personal example in this. My husband and I rate very, very differently in this test. He is an initiating fact finder, and that means essentially that anything that involves doing research or really getting down to the bottom of something, he excels at. He has got the stick-to-itiveness to stay with something until it's really, really, really well understood. And this is perfect for what he does. It works for a semiconductor capital equipment company. He's a project manager, and he needs to get down to the bottom of the data and understand what the implications are of certain things. It's very, very important for his work. I, on the other hand, am not at all like that. I resist research, in fact, and I'm very good at just getting into something, just kind of starting, and that makes him very nervous. So when you think about it from a relationship standpoint, we have to recognize these things about each other. But you can also understand that in your work environment, you're going to have people with these different ways of approaching, and if you can understand their approach versus yours, it might make things a little bit easier. So I know that if I'm presenting a new idea or I want his buy-in on something, I'm probably going to have to present more facts than I feel are needed in that particular area. So just some things to understand and recognize. And the idea behind these hacks is that you can support yourself in the things that are less easy for you. So for example, with the research or fact finding that I might have to do, I'm going to set myself up to succeed. And we're going to get into that a little while, because I can't live my life not doing things that I'm not good at. So how can we mitigate? How can we do the best that we can given our circumstances? Our circumstances. So I'm going to talk about a couple of things that are at play to get started with our biology and productivity. Oh, a couple more people. I'm excited. Some people are excited to be here, excuse me. Beirut in Lebanon. Oh, that's awesome. Nairobi, Kenya. Oh, it's very exciting. I'm glad to have you here as well. So the two systems at play when we're doing our best work, so when we're doing that creative problem solving type of work, I'm going to orient this by telling you a story. Several weeks ago now, I was putting together some of this same content, but it had to be put together for a really, really small period of time. And it's really difficult if you're going to be public speaking for just these 5-minute segments, which are happening a lot at conferences these days. You have to be really, really tight on that content. So I was working hard to pull it all together in a creative way that it could still make sense in that short amount of time. And it just wasn't happening for me. I'm sitting at my computer, I've got my brain books, I'm just focusing, nothing was happening. And I decided to take a break. And I went downstairs, and my break meant, emptying the dishwasher. And we're going to talk about breaks that move things forward. And that's an example of a break that moves something forward. The dishwasher has to get empty. So within about a minute of me working in this activity, ideas came to me, flooded to me about how I could weave together the various types of concepts that I wanted to include in this 5-minute talk. And because there was nothing else down there, I was, scribbling things down on the grocery list. And I'm sure that this type of thing has happened to you too. We can be out exercising or in the shower. A lot of times it happens when we're driving. We have an aha moment. Something finally comes together for us. And then we hope that we have some way of capturing that. If we're driving, it can be quite a challenge to capture these types of things. So what's happening here with our brain? And some of you probably know about this. When we're creatively problem solving, there's a very highly concentrated series of neural pathways that are being created in a very localized area in the cortex. So you're creating those new neural pathways in a focused, concentrated space. And then when we move away from that, we go into diffuse mode. We actually are doing some backup processing. We've moved away from the concentrated activity, And we're allowing for this kind of stored data that's in other parts of our brain to now become available. I'm going to pause myself to say, go ahead and enter any questions as they come up. It's totally okay to do this. Yes, and someone is ahead of me talking about the Pomodoro technique. Thank you, Karen. So we're going to be talking about that in just a minute. So let me go back to this. So what's happening here is amazing. It's, you know, what makes the human invention so great, and it's where our creativity comes from invention, feats of engineering, music, art. All of this comes from this dynamic set of scenarios that are happening in our brain. So knowing this, how can we reap the rewards? How can we construct our day so that we can achieve more and have more solutions built in a very successful type of way? So we're going to build in intense focus, and we're also going to build in breaks. We're going to build in that task positive network movement and neural pathway building. And then we're also going to build in breaks intentionally, not the breaks where we just kind of distract ourselves because we're either bored or not very engaged or not very excited about the task at hand. So first, we're going to talk about breaks, and then we'll talk about the ways to improve the focus, which is where that Pomodoro technique will come in. So again, these are, you know, better ways of taking breaks, ways that are not so much just being distracted, but ways that we can be intentional about it. And I really feel like there are two different kinds of breaks. And mostly we're talking about the workday, but you can include this in your personal life as much as possible. But one is the moving forward break, which literally was, you know, me taking care of a household chore while I needed to kind of regroup. And there are aspects of this type of break that you could be doing at work also. And I'd like to have you, if some of you have downloaded the handout that was included in the registration, it's also on the website for the virtual track. The first little section there, and for the fill-in, I've got, you know, moving forward. So if you can think of some ways that you could move something forward during a break. Examples at work, in my opinion, are, you know, you could do a quick check of email to see if there's anything that needs a quick response, something that you can respond to in 2 minutes or less that might help someone else move something forward, or maybe it's even you helping yourself move something forward because you need to gain a little bit more information on something. Other examples could include, you know, maybe reviewing a meeting agenda that's happening in a couple of hours, or making photocopies, or things that don't involve as much intense brain power, but help you do your work overall. And then you also need some rested relaxation breaks. And I'd really love to hear if any of you have ideas of breaks in either category that you do, because I'm hoping that you're writing some down, and I'd love for you to share, because the group think is awesome to get ideas for how other people construct their work days for, you know, maximum energy and engagement. Some things that I wrote down, you know, chatting with a colleague, although I'm very big on making sure that the colleague needs to be chatted to at that moment. They're not in the middle of their own intense focus period. Just getting up to get coffee or water, or exiting the building. Just getting a different sense of environment, going into nature, if you have that available to you, totally can change your mindset and give you a nice reset. Just drinking the actual glass of water can give you a nice reset. Any change of environment. Many companies have chill zones now, or some kind of private room where you can just kind of go and maybe even shut your eyes for 5 minutes. I recommend setting a timer so that you can get back to your work on time. But it can be amazing what clearing your head and not thinking about anything for 5 minutes, this could even be a form of meditation, can do to reset you. We have a few other things here. Take a walk, absolutely. The breathing exercises, meditation, absolutely. I really feel like moving myself away from people is key for me personally. It depends on your work environment. If you're kind of isolated and working by yourself all the time, maybe your solution is to actually engage with someone. And at home, if you're working from home, empty the dishwasher or put the clothes in the dryer, but definitely work the number of hours that you're supposed to be working. But I do like the moving forward breaks in addition to just the relaxation breaks. Okay, so let's move on to the ways to improve focus. And I believe it was Karen that mentioned the Pomodoro Method. So we're going to have intense focus, and then we're going to have breaks. And with focus, you know, some things are just easier for us to focus on than others, right? And My dad is an electrical engineer and had a successful company for years. And I asked him about this. I said, what were the aspects of your work that you could just lose yourself in? And he said, anytime he had a new design project, he said it was almost like he could lose himself for days practically. Like time is not, doesn't even seem to go, it doesn't pass. You're just totally engaged in what you're doing. So this design practice in the engineering space was amazing for him. That was his easy focus. Some things are just easier for us to focus on. With me, it's actually developing training and designing, putting together educational based things. I can really get lost in it. It's a very, very creative process. So for the easy things, you might not have an issue. You may actually have to set a timer to stop yourself at a certain point. But for the more challenging things that you have to do, and none of us are exempt from this. None of us are exempt from things that we resist, from procrastination, all of this. And I asked my dad the same question. I said, what are the things that just totally zap your energy? And he said, if there was a problem with the product on the other end, and he said, especially if I had anything to do with it, if we were on the side of having failed the client, it just drained him of all his energy, and he was the one that had to deal with it. Yes, he had someone in the client relations field, but as the CEO, president of the firm, he really felt like it was his position to get in there and correct the problem. And no one wants to do that, right? But depending on the task with the challenging things that you have to do, using the Pomodoro technique can be really, really effective. And so what is it? We've talked about it. We've mentioned this Pomodoro. The terminology actually came because it was an Italian college student who coined it, and he would use a kitchen timer that looked like a tomato, so it was the Pomodoro timer, and he would set it for 25 minutes and he would study. And he found that if he focused really, really intensely for that amount of time, he was just an incredible study guy once he could do that. And then he would take a 5-minute break after the 25 minutes. He would re-engage again. And it's important that you're setting the timer each time. Sometimes you're getting lost in what you're doing, but sometimes you could get lost in the break too. So you need to get back to the task at hand. So you do 3 of those, 25, 5, 25, 5. And at the end of the third one, take a longer break. So now you've worked this 90-minute-ish set of time. And it is amazing what you will get done. We've got London online now too. So yes, and anything that I suggest also, or anything anyone ever suggests at any meeting or conference, do any of it as an experiment. If you have resistance to any suggestion you ever get, that's cool. But then question your resistance and experiment. Just try it a couple of times. This one can really be mind-blowing, and it has a couple of other advantages. You begin to understand how long things take. You can get better at scheduling yourself because you realize what's realistic. You also can realize sometimes, wow, that only took 15 minutes. I was really putting that off for like 3 days. I got it done like in no time. So there's a lot of benefit. Another benefit is that our brain wants to complete open tasks. It's the Zygarnik effect. We want to end things, to close things. It's the way that we're built. And if you've got a project that's going on for weeks and weeks and weeks, it can be very frustrating because you're not getting that satisfaction of completion. But if you can satisfactorily complete a 25-minute Pomodoro, there's satisfaction in that, hey, I stayed focused for that amount of time, and look at everything that I accomplished, even in that period of time. So many of us today have meetings and we're responding to email. There's all these things that make the work environment very, very dynamic. But as you approach your work, if you can schedule in Pomodoros, if you could get in a set of 3 sometime in the morning, a set of 3 sometime in the afternoon, you'd really be getting a lot of project-based work done, even though your day is torn apart potentially by other interruptions, other things that are getting in the way. So in the handout here, I've got the easy. What are some of your easy things? What do you love to do? Does anyone want to share aspects of their work that they love? And it would be interesting for me to know too, what are the things that you kind of don't like, if you're willing to share? I just find it very fascinating. It's all neutral in the long run. No one's going to get chastised for disliking aspects of their work. And then I have a line here on the handout for mitigators, and that's to say that if there are ways that you can support yourself otherwise for those resisted tasks, put them into place. An example from home life, so this isn't going to be work oriented, but if you're trying a new exercise regimen, one of the things that you might do is be sure that all of the exercise clothes are ready to go way in advance, so that you're not putting that extra stumbling block in the way for you to have an excuse not to go, that, there's enough time to get there for the class or whatever. So that you're just preparing in advance when your head's in the right place and you know what your best interest is. So think about ways to mitigate some of those challenging things. How can you set yourself up so it's not as challenging? All right, okay. Someone likes my kitchen timer concept. That's great. That's Biovin, if I'm saying your name correctly. So yes, and many, many people use this. Jennifer says she can write code for hours, but then she gets burnt out. Okay, I feel that too. I think there are a lot of things that eventually we're kind of fried with. So good time to take a break. And maybe even if you can record how much time, what time point you're at, where, maybe take a break slightly before you get to total burnout. Debugging is pretty addictive too. Interesting. Okay, this is very cool for me. Thank you so much. I can use these when I speak at the conference to understand what some of the cooler and less cool activities are for your work. Okay, and then going on to the next portion of this handout, it's called the Procrastination Buster Formula. So in this, you're going to write down your resisted activity, something that you have been putting off for a while, or that you just don't approach. Maybe you should address it weekly or with some cadence, that you just tend to back burner it again and again, and then it becomes maybe a bigger issue than it should be. So you're going to name what those activities are. You're going to block your time using the Pomodoro Method. So literally, if you can go into your calendar, and I know best laid plans, sometimes things go awry and you're not able to actually according to the plan that you make, but it's better to have a plan than not have a plan. You're going to block your time using the Pomodoro Method. So you can, if you only have time for 1 or 2, that's okay too. I think ideally if you could do 3 Pomodoros, awesome. And then the last part, I have written there, determine, and then 3 blanks. And the 3 blanks stand for very next actions. And I got this from David Allen. David Allen is the author of a book called Getting Things Done, one of my initial gurus in terms of the way that we work and the way that we get things done. And whenever you're looking at a kind of a nebulous or not very exciting task, something you're doing for the first time, something that feels, that's where your procrastination really, really builds. If you think of the very, very, very first thing that you need to do in order to move that thing forward, you have a sense of relief. They're usually big, complicated projects are a sum of a lot of little things that you've done before. And the things that you haven't done before, you can get information, you know who to reach out to, you're gonna handle it okay, but just what are the very, very, very initial steps to take? And sometimes people will make a task list and they will have very nebulous titles on their list. And I have a good example. This is from personal life right now. I have a graduation party that I need to be planning. And my tendency is to write graduation party, but that's really not helping me very much. I know that the first thing that I need to do right now is one of 2 things. I either need to map out all of the things I need to think about, or I need to figure out from my neighbor who might be a good person to provide some of this food, because we're not having a very big party, but I don't want to spend all my time cooking. So, and my neighbor lived in this community forever, and he would know like who those people are. So my very next action really is to send neighbor a text so that I can begin the process of vetting a caterer or figuring out if we're going to be cooking at home. So that's an example of very next actions. It can really help to reduce the threat response, which is what is happening when we don't want to approach some complicated task. So now we're going to talk about the threat response, but I'm going to look here. So Husin says that he keeps his coin collection nearby and uses them to take breaks. Interesting. 2 to 3 hours of work, and then a hobby. Now, I love this, and coffee. I love this a lot, and I'm going to reveal, since you shared that, and I thank you for that. Sometimes when I'm at home, I used to take voice lessons as a kid, and I love to sing. I love to do karaoke, and sometimes when I'm at home and there's no appointments or meetings or, I will take a break and actually sing or do something like that. So if you have a musical instrument and you had the option, I think that's another really fabulous way to break up your day. Have something hobby oriented that you can feel drawn to take that break. And again, you have to set the timer because you can get really lost in those types of things. Okay, awesome. So I'm moving on to threat response, which I'm sure many of us are quite aware of also. So we have these tasks or big projects, and maybe we lack confidence around specific tasks. Procrastination may set in often due to fear of failure, which we all experience. And what can we do? Fail fast is what I would say. And I don't want to say something wrong because I'm not in the engineering space, but I have heard from many engineers in my life that it's much better to figure out the problems early, right, than when something is really far down the line and potentially with the customer or something like that. So failure is part of everything we do, but it still gets in the way of our ability to approach things openly, approach new projects. So we're going to look a little bit about the evolution of the brain and how it's affecting the threat response. And I'm going to use public speaking as an example of this. Public speaking, as we know, is the #1 fear of humans. And so we'll go through these functional layers of the brain. And the way that I'm describing this today, it's really schematic. The brain is much more complex than how I'm about to explain it. And I hear this a lot of places these days, so you've probably heard aspects of this too. But our most primitive, evolutionarily speaking, brain is the same brain that is shared with lizards and birds. It is the amygdala, and it is what regulates our functions, our hormonal release, our respiratory, our breathing, our heartbeat. All of these things are being controlled by the amygdala without us thinking about it, right? And then on top of this is the next evolutionary development, the brain, which is the limbic system. And it's responsible for our emotion. And you can think of animals out in the wild. We share this with other mammals. And this is where fear, anxiety, even our sexual longing comes in. Everything emotional, this part of the brain is responsible for. And then finally, the cortex is the highest, most evolutionarily advanced part of our brain. And this is where symbolic reasoning comes in. This is the part of our brain that allows us to create amazing things in art and science, music. It really is about how we're able to make connections, how our brain is wiring to create amazing things. So what happens then when we're preparing a speech? We can have a very neutral thought in our conscious mind by the cortex, developing this thought that, I could be judged by my peers. I could fail. I could forget everything I was going to say. And that sends a message to the limbic system, which is, fear, anxiety. And then that directly sends a message to the amygdala, which might release hormones. Our heart might beat faster. We might sweat more. And the hormone release is probably one of the biggest issues. We get a little adrenaline, we get a little cortisol, and these are awesome if we actually have to run from something or if we have to fight out in the wilderness or on the savannah, but we don't typically have to exert the end of energy in the work environment. However, we're constantly being spritzed by these hormones, and they're having a major impact on the healthcare system and on employees within the corporate space today. Very, very frustrating and a little bit scary. I mean, I had family members very close to me end up in the hospital because of stress at work, and these are not small numbers. So this is part of what's happening. But what can we do about it? To some degree, we can attempt to tell ourselves different stories. But before that, we need to recognize when we're having an emotional response and kind of just check in with ourselves and try to figure out if whatever is causing that emotional response is true. Sometimes we're filling in the worst case possible scenario in the absence of information. So if you don't know a lot of the dynamics around something and it's leading you to have you're jumping to a conclusion, it's leading to an emotional response, you're not putting yourself in the best space to do your most creative work. You're actually limiting your focus. Your brain isn't working as nicely as it would otherwise. So the idea is to begin to tell yourself a different story. And on the handout, I have this stress remedy as 10 alternatives. And that is to to tell yourself 10 other reasons why something could be happening. You've interpreted it one way and it's leading to this emotional response. What are 10 other things that could legitimately be happening that would also answer, you know, this particular scenario? If you are in a position where you've got a good relationship with people in your team or your boss, you can check in and ask the question. You know, you can just say, hey, you have a minute, you know, remember X and such scenario? Well, this is kind of what I took away from that. Is that the same take that you have? Is that your read? Just kind of neutral and just see what they say. And sometimes they're going to say, that's not at all what we thought. And I have an example from this because actually Brene Brown talks about this. Some of you might know Brene Brown. This is the book Rising Strong. And in this book, she gives an example of her own team. And they were in a multi-day meeting scenario. And at the end of one of the days, she was rearranging the schedule a little bit. She moved one of her team members to have his speaking time the next day. And he felt himself have an emotional response. And because he's in this awesome team where they can say what they need to, he said, Brene, the story I'm telling myself is that you have moved me because my project that I've been working on for the last, you know, really long time is you're devaluing it. You know, it doesn't need the time or we're putting it off. It's going back burner. And she corrected him and she said, you know, I know that's absolutely complete opposite. I recognize the importance of what you've been doing and I'm moving it to tomorrow because it needs more time and we don't have enough time today. So check in and come up with all the other alternative things that can be happening. We just make ourselves crazy sometimes with anxiety when the worst is probably not what's true. And it certainly isn't helping way, really, it isn't. So that is the last of the tips per the handout today. And now I'm curious to see if any questions have come in. Let's see here. Anyone have anything specific that came up for them? Okay. All right, so I've got one here that is, you know, what are some of the actual specific tools, systems, and approach that Linda uses in order to approach time and tasks? And I'll talk a little bit about this. And ultimately, I don't have one system that I think is a one size fits all. And I also think that people change what they do over the years as the level of complexity in their work changes, as their style changes, as new products are introduced, new apps are introduced. So a lot of folks are using all different types of apps to keep themselves scheduled and to keep their tasks in line. Asana is one. Some of you probably use project management software, but taking a step back a little bit, I actually use paper still for my regular weekly calendaring and task management. But I'm going to hold this up. This is a product called the Planner Pad. I'm just showing you so that you can see that I can do some brainstorming, but I can also do some what's happening at specific times during the day down there as well. And I'm also very, very color oriented. So I use a lot of different kinds of pens and that helps me. Clearly my brain works better when I have lots of different color going on here. But what I do is all of my actual appointments and meetings are scheduled, of course, in an electronic calendar. But at some point a week in advance, so maybe on Thursday of this week, I'll begin to look at next week. And I will take all of my hard appointments and put them into the paper calendar. And as I do that, I'm processing what needs to happen for those types of events. Like this week, I happen to be going to New York tonight. And because I knew that I had this today during the day, which, you know, takes time and my focus, I knew that packing had to happen like way before that, right? So I'm just sorting these things out so that I'm not in a jam later on. And some of you are probably better at this anyway. Maybe it's more intuitive. Maybe it's one of your strengths or your intelligences. For me, it hasn't been most of my life, which is why I teach it now. So that's what I'm doing as I'm scheduling in the hard appointments. But then what's cool is that I'm able to see the open times. And I can schedule in my project work in Pomodoro style in the various open times on the paper. And if it happens according to the paper, that's awesome. But sometimes things shift. And another component of what's happening here when I'm looking at next week is I've got a few other categories. I've got the play category, which is where we saw the hobbies before, or for me, it might just be total rest and relaxation. It might mean dinner with my husband. I've also got chores. So this would be anything that I have to do that's a little bit more maintenance oriented. And that could be maintenance for the house, but that could also be maintenance for the business, whether it's invoicing and, you know, just things that are a little bit more chore in nature, looking at the at billing and accounts receivable over time. And then I've also got exercise there. So I'm considering all those categories as I'm building the schedule for the week. You know, how many times is it reasonable to exercise? How many times, or what are the chores that actually have to happen this week, and that type of thing. So keeping all of those in mind as I'm mapping out my week with paper. And research has shown that, you know, using a pen to paper, something happens at a different level cellularly when we're engaging that way. And I personally cannot have everything electronic. I know a lot of people swear by it, but I would encourage you to continue to use whatever you use. If you are comfortable being, you know, 100% electronic all the time, that's great. But don't laugh at your colleagues that are still using paper. Okay. Let's see. Okay, and the other question here is about staying motivated. Sometimes putting in a new processes can feel like work, and it is work. And motivation, though, it comes from deciding that what you're doing is not okay anymore. Usually we're way more motivated by something that is painful for us than by something that we want. So if you want something badly enough, you're usually willing then to change your habits. So if it is an exercise regimen or an eating habits type of thing, for some people it's a health scare that will finally motivate them to move along. But if it's in the work environment, quite different. I think it's important that everyone knows how big and important their role is. And I think that this gets lost sometimes in corporate environments, that there can be people further down on the totem pole that don't really get the overall picture of a project or what their team's contributions are. And if you're very, very clear on those things, it keeps the motivation level much higher. It keeps engagement level much higher. So having systems in place to support you can definitely help to stay motivated and use some systems and hacks. Okay, I think I'm seeing another question come in. How do you handle a shift in plans? In other words, you've created your schedule and then a wrench gets thrown into the operation. I'm not good with dealing with change or changes on the fly. Yeah, this one, in my corporate career, I was forced to get good at, and I encourage people to take a step back and look at a period of time to try to assess how often it happens. If you could say that 30% of your time is being kind of, you know, hacked or, you know, by other circumstances outside of your control, I would say try to adjust your expectations of what you can actually get done. I mean, some jobs actually mean that you're going to be responding. You're going to be in response mode like 40% of the time. And that means that you can only schedule in so much of a plan. I think, you know, someone mentioned breathing a while ago, and taking a step back and understanding that it's not ideal, but that work environments are dynamic and that we have to be able to adjust and stay agile and have things be imperfect. I think that's it. And it's very, very frustrating when you know that if you had only had, you know, name it, like 30 more minutes to stay focused on something, you would have been done. And now you're going to not be able to go back to it till sometime later. It's going to take you that much longer to get re-engaged in the work. That is just the unfortunate side of like being a human being in a dynamic work environment. And so some of it is an adjustment in expectation and staying, you know, as relaxed as you can and shifting. But allow yourself to be a little frustrated. It's a very, very frustrating experience. So I have another question here. The system works where flexibility is allowed, but what if there is a rigid system in time utilization? How do you convince management about what you are proposing? So this is interesting. I know that some organizations have time tools that are really tracking moment to moment what is happening. And this is a really big question. And if management does not understand the importance of the biorhythms of people, of human beings, that's a big problem. I do think that we need to, even if you need to be fairly rigid in your plan for the day, that there need to be breaks put in there. So I don't know if you're asking about being able to shift away from certain type of work and then shift back, or if that's really where that question is. But there's a lot of data to support the need for breaks and how the human biology works. And, I'd be happy to dig some of those out if you want to be in touch with me at a later time. But I'm going to read the next question, but I want to stop myself for just a moment. The calendar tool that I use, as well as the way that I approach it, is a toolkit that I send sometimes at the end of a speaking engagement or something like that. So it's like a few pages from the actual book that I use, in addition to some bullet points and a tiny video of me saying how I approach it. And if you're interested in that toolkit, you can send me an email directly. And my email is on the handout, but I'll say it right now. It's Linda, and my name is with an I, not a Y. So Linda@LivingBluPrints.com. And there's no E in the blue. So it's living, BLU, and then right into prints, PRINTS.com. If you are interested in that, I will send it to you. You could just write calendar in the subject line, or IEEE or something like that, and I will send that off. I'm going to read the next question. So it says, I'm very organized electronically. Everything is on your iPhone. You mentioned apps before. What are the best apps you suggest for time management and organization? There's a couple that, there was an app that came out a few years ago that was called Remember the Milk. I think that's what it was. And that was one where you could have categories of things to remember, so that you would know. So if you're out running errands, what are the other things that you should be doing while you're in a certain area? So that's one tool. Asana is another tool that you can sign up for. With just one person, it's a free tool that you can use on your phone and on your computer. I really like the interface of Asana. It's really nice to use. I'm a very visually stimulated person, so I really like that. I also use Evernote for quite a bit, and Evernote is on my phone and it's on any device I want to log into. And I like that one too, because I can, it saves everything like OneNote automatically. I don't have to go in and save. It's got lots of notebooks and categories, and I can keep lists in there. So like travel lists, things that I'm doing all the time. And sometimes I just want to remember a quote, or, I just love the fact that I can talk into my phone, something that I'm reading from a book, so that I don't forget it later, that type of thing. I think there was one other that I wanted to mention. If it comes to me, I will share it in the forum that is being created by this. Let's see. There must be a learning curve to get acclimated to this new lifestyle. Is it hard to get into a groove? It can be, but with most things, I would say that you take one step at a time. And my journey with all of this started when I was, commuting and initially I was commuting about 4 or 5 miles from Cambridge, Massachusetts to Boston, Massachusetts. I lived in a condo and was very, very close to work. And then I met my husband and I moved quite a distance. I moved to Ipswich, Massachusetts. It's about 35 miles, but it increased my commute each week by, I went from 5 hours total, so it was like a half hour in, half hour back, to 15 hours total. So major, major change. And I hit this wall, and it was like there was no time or space for anything other than work and getting to work and cooking food and things like, to maintain myself. So that's where all of this came in. I had to get better at things in order to have joy back in my life, to have my hobbies back, to have my exercise back. So I took it one step at a time. And I did start with the energy piece. I felt very drained all the time. So I took deliberate focus with my food. And I know that we're talking a lot right now about what we're putting in place at work. But when you start focusing on any aspect of your life, it's going to begin to bleed into other aspects. My mind started work. I became more organizational in my thinking, if that makes any sense. It was like my brain was being conditioned. It's a muscle that's getting worked out. So as I got more and more strategic about how I had to lay everything out in order to eat better, it got me to be very, very strategic about all the other ways that I was organizing my time and space. And ultimately, it came down to some things that we're going to talk about at the conference when we do this session. And my paper fell onto the ground. But so I'm going to be talking about this proprietary model that I developed. And like I said, we're only talking about one aspect of it today, which is execution. But when you look at all three of the big bubbles, it's also assessing and deciding. And when you get pretty clear on everything that could be in your life, and then the things that you're actually choosing for your life, you can be very deliberate about where you want to start, what the big priorities are that have been kind of backburnered, and where you want to be sure that you're creating more time and space. Ultimately, most of us are trying to do way too much. And if we can get really clear on what the big priorities are at work and at home, we can get much more focused on what to drop and where to spend the time and attention. Okay, so if there was one thing I could leave this session to do right now to be more productive, what would that one thing be? Oh, okay. Good question. Oh my. Okay, yes, here it is. The one thing would be to block your calendar either today or tomorrow. Pick a half hour that you're going to sit and think about the next week. So that's really the thing that you can do, and that you immediately, but then I would suggest, I would offer that you would do the process of looking at the week going forward, looking at everything that you've got going on and map it out. If you don't have a paper calendar, that's fine. You can use a notebook. I love notebooks. I've got all sorts of things jotted down for the progress of various projects. And, you could just use paper to kind of map out the week. And as you do this, you can consider, how do I want to feel at the end of next week? We sometimes in the corporate space, we don't talk about feeling all that much, but as we were talking about the brain and the way that it's layered, I mean, we can't remove the emotional part of our biology. So if you wanted to feel a certain way by the end of next week, what are the things that are really going to drive that, so that you pencil it in? So then one thing really is scheduling the time for you to sit down and think about it. All right, so that is the last of the questions that I see coming in. If I see any more, I will interrupt myself as I read, as we look at this final note here. All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today. Great conversation, great questions. Thank you for them so much. Before we sign off, I want to ask everyone to keep the conversation on social media, keep it going. You can use the hashtag WeWednesday, that's WIE Wednesday, after the hashtag, or follow on Twitter, and that's at WIELC, so WIEILC. And thank you again to the sponsor, Ericsson. And the next session is going to be on May 9th, and it's a panel discussion about women on the web, how to utilize social media to build your brand. For more information on how to sign up, you can visit the IEEE WIEILC conference website. And have a great, productive, successful day, and get some rest and breaks as well. All right, we'll see you next time.